Okay, final point. I think it's important that we concentrate on this because I think we're likely to see more of this. I actually don't think that Iraq is such a perfect storm that we're unlikely to see these kind of problems again, this kind of intermingling of problems. First, as I suggested earlier, it's typically the case that you see an intermingling of these problems. Go back to one of the nice points that Steve Biddle did make in his argument was, don't think that Iraq is analogous to Vietnam, and he's absolutely right. Iraq is not Vietnam. But if I can use that analogy for a second, we should remember that there were elements of terrorism in the Vietnam War, and there were also elements of a failed state in Vietnam. We always had a government there, but it wasn't a terribly effective or efficient government, and some of the work done on the Vietnam War has identified the failings, the incapacity of the South Vietnamese government as being part of our problem. So in every one of these cases that you can look around, you can find lots of examples of this, of these intermingling of these different problems, and so we have to deal with that as well. But beyond that, when I look at the kind of post-colonial, post-Cold War world that we're now living in, what I see are more and more open spaces on the map, areas where you have failed or failing states and where you could have situations like this. Just to put it simply, when the empires existed, especially before the Second World War, the empires controlled big chunks of the map. And they suppressed the population, they controlled much of the world, they kept down people, they prevented a lot of chaos, so they kept the chaos to the extent it existed to very manageable levels. And I'm not suggesting that the empires were good for the people living there, only to say that there weren't too many open areas of the map. The empires were there in one way, shape, or form. During the Cold War, of course, we rolled back the empires, and again, I'm not suggesting that was a bad thing. I think it was a positive development. But to replace them, we started propping up nasty military dictatorships all around the world. Okay? Now, we didn't necessarily create all of these nasty dictatorships, although we created some of them. And it wasn't just us, it was the Soviets as well. And it was mostly about who controlled more of the world, who had more of the map, how much you could paint blue, how much you could paint red. Quite honestly, in retrospect, it all seems kind of foolish because no one really thought that Congo or Chile were going to be contributing large numbers of troops to fight 20th Shock Army on the inter-German border if there were ever a war. But somehow we thought this was important. And to some extent, if you really want to be glib, it seems like a lot of the Cold War really was about who these different countries, who these different dictators were buying arms from, basically to kill their own people. Were they using M16s or Kalashnikovs to kill their own people? And again, that's not to make an argument about the military-industrial complex. That's not the argument I'm making. It's just to say that we didn't allow many areas of the map to open up because we were so concerned about this superpower balance. Well, the Cold War is gone, the empires are gone. We really have stopped supporting dictators in most of the world. You have to work hard. I mean, Musharraf stands out as a dictator that we are genuinely supporting. And the same thing for the Soviets, obviously Nazarbayev, there are some examples out there. But in most of the world, the superpowers don't care anymore, okay? And as a result, what you've had is weird agglomeration of different governments. We do have some very successful functional democracies that have sprung up in these parts of the world, but they tend to be rare. We also do still have some dictatorships which are basically supporting themselves on their own, oftentimes in the face of international pressure. But what we have a lot of are kind of dysfunctional democracies and oligarchies. All of these states are at frequent times in jeopardy of failing. When you look around at Africa, at Latin America, at even Southeast Asia, there are lots of countries there. And when you read the newspaper, you see it. You see the coups, you see the problems, you see the failed elections, you see the failed governments. So you've got the potential for lots of these open spaces on the map. And what I'm saying is, in Iraq, we created an open space. We didn't mean to, but that's what we did. We created a failed state, we created a security vacuum in Iraq, and it gave rise to these problems. Now, there have been other places where we went in to deal with the problems of a failed state and corresponding other problems of insurgencies and terrorism and civil wars. Yugoslavia is a very good example of that. There were a lot of people who want us to go into Sudan. There are a lot of people who wished that we could have gone into Rwanda or Congo. Those are other areas that broadly fall into this category. So I'd close simply by saying that I think it is very important that we start thinking about insurgency in the context of this interrelationship with failed states, with warlordism, with terrorism, and begin to think about how we apply these methods, which I think we have figured out. And said, we can say we're not applying them very well. Maybe that is the first step. We need to figure out how to apply them better when we actually do have a real counterinsurgency. But I think we also need to think about how we start using these tools to deal with these other kind of interrelated situations, which unfortunately I think we're going to have more and more of as time goes by. Thank you.